Hi, everybody. Brian Norcross here with a Monday evening update on incredible Hurricane Milton and the extreme threat to people on the west coast of Florida. As a matter of fact, the entire peninsula of Florida and extending up into coastal Georgia and South Carolina is under tropical alerts of one type or the other at this point in advance of this storm that is incredibly strong now. One of the strongest storms we've ever seen, a Category 5, 180 mile an hour winds, and is forecast to grow in size. Even though it is forecast to be weaker by the time it gets to Florida, it will be bigger. And storm surge is caused by the bigness of the storm more than by the intensity of the storm. So this is all bad news for Florida less than 2 weeks after Helene. So there's the incredible hurricane right now. 180 mile an hour winds is the estimate. 905 millibars is the pressure. It's one of the top 10 lowest pressures that we have in the record book, now moving to the east at 10 miles an hour and paralleling that northern coast there of the Yucatan. When we look close up at it here, we can see how close it's going to come to the Yucatan, so they have hurricane warnings there for that northern coast. And we also see, look at the eye shrink. And so this is like a figure skater bringing in the arms and spinning faster. And when we see that, usually what happens with a relatively small hurricane, which this is right now, when you have the eye shrink in like that, we get a bigger eye form, which is the equivalent of opening up the arms, which will make the winds be less strong. But then over time, that eye shrinks and it re-intensifies. So we expect to see fluctuations here, but this is behaving like that category of storm that we don't often see, but we have some experience with, that is just at the top end of the scale. So look at the radar coming here out of Sabanquey in Mexico. Sabanquey is located down here to the south of Campeche, so we're looking at a good long ways. But there you see the radar. There's two things to notice. One is you see the radar eye is shrinking as it goes. Also, look in here, and I think you can see a ring developing outside of the eye. That's an indication that quite often when we see that it's going to develop a larger eye, weaken and expand in size, and then contract and re-intensify. So we'll see exactly how that sequence plays out. They really can't 100% detect that, exactly predict it. But anyway, it does look like that might be happening. Here is the forecast from the Hurricane Center as of the 5 p.m. Eastern Time advisory. The thinking is overnight tonight, when you see Tuesday AM, you mean overnight, up to 185 mile an hour. Category 5, and then maybe some weakening through some kind of process. Normally, these storms don't stay at that maximum intensity for a long period of time, either because of internal processes or just atmospheric processes or impacts affected in some kind of way. But in any case, incredibly strong Category 5. We expect it to be expanding in size a bit through this process, but not a lot. Still a relatively small hurricane by tomorrow evening and super intense. And then on by Wednesday morning, overnight, again, still maintaining this super strong strength. As you'll see, this is a very prime area for intensification here in terms of the amount of heat under the storm is available right there. And then when we get to Wednesday, the upper air pattern and the whole atmospheric pattern changes drastically. So the thinking is that by Wednesday afternoon, it's in a weakening trend, still an incredibly strong Category 4, but through this process, it's growing in size. So by Wednesday afternoon, we're having some wind effects down in the Keys. We're starting to push water toward the southwest coast as the storm is expanding in size. And that continues through the day Wednesday into Wednesday evening. So now landfall is scheduled for 2 a.m. nominally after midnight, let's say, Wednesday night into Thursday morning, somewhere there on the west coast. Obviously, everybody in the Tampa Bay area wants to know, is this going to be a worst case scenario for Tampa Bay? The answer And the only answer is it could be. We can't say it's not going to be. The various computer forecasts put it in the vicinity of Tampa Bay. If it goes just to the north or over Tampa Bay, something like that, then that is going to produce life-threatening storm surge. And I'll show you the areas, but over an amazing amount of the Tampa, St. Petersburg metropolitan area, over the beaches in Clearwater, down at Cortez and Bradenton, and on down the coast, Longboat Key near Sarasota, and into Sarasota and so forth. I mean, this will be horrendous. If it goes south, of course, it might not be as bad. It won't be as bad in Tampa. If it's close by south, it's still going to affect many, many areas around Tampa Bay, but it's going to be worse down to Fort Myers and Naples, and that's why we have these extreme storm surge forecasts for the possibility of 10, 15 feet of water up and down that coast. All right, so here are the warnings that are out right now for wind. This is all about the wind. How far inland will the strong winds go? So affecting Fort Myers up to Orlando and Cedar Key. This is where everybody needs to be ready for hurricane force winds. Doesn't mean that whole area will get them. If the storm goes farther north, then the winds will not be as strong down here in Fort Myers, and down to Bonita Beach, which is between Fort Myers and Naples, is the limit of the hurricane warning area. Down to the south, and including the Keys, tropical storm warning, and that begins, by the way, early on Wednesday morning hours, when the winds pick up down that way. And then up to the north, also tropical storm warnings up there, even for the eastern Florida panhandle. And then for the coast, from the Treasure Coast on north up to the Georgia line, a hurricane watch in effect. Well, why would there be a hurricane watch there? Indeed, if the storm comes across the state, something like this, we might get some hurricane force winds that survive the trip across the state. But the big difference here, and I'm going to talk a lot more about this in just a moment, is we're going to have very strong upper level winds. Those upper level winds that are going to be part of that weakening process, and the main factor in the weakening process. That's going to energize the storm on the left side, this whole side up here. Now, the winds are going to be coming around, when the storm is, say, in this area here, are going to be coming around like this. But coming off the ocean, they're going to be energized, so we can get the hurricane force winds coming this way as well in this case. So this will not be like a normal August or September hurricane, where we are most concerned about the right side. In this case, the left side is going to be enhanced. As a matter of fact, that's where the most significant flooding is likely to be, and the strong winds coming in from the southeast and eventually from the east as the hurricane heads on offshore and transitions eventually into a non-tropical storm, which has a whole different distribution in winds. By the way, you don't see it here, but the tropical storm watches extend up into Georgia and South Carolina as well. And then in terms of storm surge, remember I talked about the storm getting bigger. So the storm surge warning goes all the way down for the entire west coast of Florida, essentially from Cedar Key down to Flamingo, and of course including all the big cities there on the west coast. So this, as we learned from Ian, this is going to be an extreme version of don't look at the cone, that the significant effects are going to occur outside the cone. And then remember what I was talking about with the storm when it gets over here somewhere and the winds come around like this, pushing water against the northeast coast and on up into Georgia and South Carolina. So that coastline is under a storm surge watch, meaning the possibility of life-threatening storm surge of at least 3 feet. So the forecasts up there are up to 5 feet along the coast. And then also notice storm surge watches down here, down the St. Johns River, 2 to 4 feet above normal high tide. All of these amounts are above the normal high tide line. So if you go to the beach there in Flagler Beach or someplace and you stand there on the high tide line, the forecast is for 5 feet of water above that normal high tide line. That would not be survivable, and you can look and see how far inland that would go. That's what evacuations are about. In the Tampa Bay area, up to 15 feet above the normal high tide line. Obviously, nobody could survive that. We'll talk about that right here. So here you see in this area from north of Tampa Bay down to Englewood or so, you have up to 15 feet. Somewhere in that area, depending on exactly where that landfall point is, the water rise from the Gulf is expected to be up to 15 feet, say 10 to 15 feet above normal high tide. This would be the highest storm surge that's been recorded, would rival the 1848 hurricane that put 15 feet into downtown Tampa, or the land that is downtown Tampa. Fort Brooke was there at that time. 1921 was 10 or 11 feet, put water over much of Pinellas County, and just destroyed most of the buildings near the water in and around Tampa Bay. So exactly where that peak is going to occur, we don't know. But all down here, closer to Sarasota, of course, Bradenton, Cortez, which is right along the coast, which was wiped out, by the way, in the 1921 hurricane, and all the way down to Englewood farther south. The water, if this forecast bears out, as it probably will somewhere, the water is going to come completely over those barrier islands. So this is not going to be a thing where the barrier island is going to stop the surge. It will come over and into the inland bays and waterways, harbors and inlets all along the coast where the worst of that storm surge is. Down around the Fort Myers, Port Charlotte area, up to 10 feet, up to the north, up Newport Richey, Port Richey, up toward Homosassa Springs, again, up to 10 feet of water forecast. Here in Tampa Bay, the numbers are not important here. You know what the forecast is for Tampa Bay. 10 to 15 feet, so up to 15 feet of water. And I want you to look at where the worst of the storm can be, depending on the exact angle of the wind. So all of these areas are threatened. For anybody in this area, you're in a life-threatening situation. So Ruskin, the entire eastern coast there of Hillsborough Bay, downtown Tampa here, Davis Island, all down here. This is called the Interbay Peninsula here. Very populated area until we get down to the south end, and that's MacDill Air Force Base there. This would be under 10 to 15 feet of water, depending on the exact angle. If this water is driven in the bay, it can't get out. This is Hillsborough Bay up here, Old Tampa Bay here. It just fills in there and then spills out all of these bays. This is Pinellas County, eastern side of St. Petersburg here, and Gandy. This is the Gandy Bridge. All of these will be closed and underwater. The Howard Franklin Bridge up here, closed and underwater. Probably this is the Howard Franklin Bridge. Up to the north, the Courtney Causeway up there, likely closed and underwater. And the same issues all the way along the beaches, Reddington Shores, Madeira Beach, St. Pete Beach, all likely underwater if the center goes north of Tampa Bay. If it goes south, different areas will be underwater, because if the wind comes this way, then it gets more Pinellas than it does if it comes in this way. Then it gets more Hillsborough, and things can be a little bit different. But in any case, the threat here is absolutely extreme. And it's the same down to the south, because if the storm does come a little bit south and puts the storm surge in over Captiva Island, conceivably over Pine Island, into Cape Coral, into the Caloosahatchee here. And all where you see the reds and the oranges, that's all impossible to survive if the storm surge happens to peak where you are. The whole area isn't going to get it, but a little bit of angle difference makes a big difference in who gets the worst surge. So It's impossible to tell exactly, but this is what evacuations are all about, is protecting you from these extreme threats, a threat like we have never seen on the west coast of Florida in modern times. All right, so let me talk about the models here for a second. Here I want to show you what I mean. There you see the cone, there's where the storm is. And notice here, this is that loop current that we talked about in Hurricane Helene, where the water flows, the very warm water flows in here and tries to make a hard right, but some of it can't, and it goes up into the Gulf. So this is the most energetic water in the Gulf of Mexico in terms of powering a hurricane. And look at this. It's right in the middle of the cone, and the forecasts go right over it. You see how they all come right in the Tampa Bay area. We're not going to know until Wednesday, maybe Wednesday evening, I don't think, whether the worst of it is going to be in Tampa Bay or it's going to be a little farther south. It's just too close to call. There you see the consensus near the middle of the cone. And by the way, the Hurricane Center has been noting that the spaghetti models, for whatever reason, seem to be located too far south compared to what they're supposed to be tracking. So the spaghetti models are not the best indicator for this storm for whatever reason. But we can use these, this ensemble modeling, it's called, to talk about, could it go slower or faster? Yes, the answer is it could be. So when we talk about landfall at 2 a.m., could it be at 8 p.m.? Yes, that would be these over here. Could it be the overnight hours or early on Thursday? Yes, it'll be over there. Hurricane Center takes a middle ground, so somewhere near midnight to the early morning hours for the landfall of the storm. So what's going on in the atmosphere? Well, we have just this horrendously unfortunate situation going on right now, intensifying this storm and leaving us with this Category 5. Up to the north, first of all, look at this. This is all very, very dry air in the atmosphere. If we could get this into the hurricane, it would weaken it really quickly. But what you can see is a bubble of moisture right over the storm, this high moisture content you see there in the legend. The other thing we see is you see these very strong winds here blowing across the northern Gulf. Well, if we could get those strong winds into the hurricane, then that would weaken it. Well, both of those weakening factors are going to happen, but not until the hurricane gets up here. For now, those strong winds are actually pulling air out of the storm, and that allows more air to rush in at the surface and actually is part of the intensification environment here for the hurricane right now. So let's look at it on the computer model, and there you can see all the dry air to the north, and then the dry air trying to wrap in here, but it can't. It's being held off by the moisture wrapping around the storm. We also see over in here this front that's been causing all the rain in Florida for the last couple days, and another low pressure system, and it's going to move on away. All right, let's go. Here we are. This Monday afternoon. Now let's move forward in time, and you see the hurricane starts to get picked up and lifted to the north. You see this model is a little bit different than the Hurricane Center forecast. This model is heading a little farther north of Tampa. Hurricane Center forecast heading very near Tampa at this point. But look what's happened. Some of this dry air has been able to wrap here up into the circulation. But more importantly, and that's part of the weakening process, remember I talked about the upper level winds are now kind of screaming over it, which is stretching the hurricane out. You see how the moisture is all stretched out there? The other thing all that weakening process is doing is it's kind of unspooling the storm, and it's spreading out. So now the strong winds are much stronger and farther out, so they're pushing this Gulf water in toward the coast. So mildly down in the Keys, water rise in the Keys, but not super threatening, but a high king tide, maybe 2-3 feet of water in the Keys, but then starting here on the southwest coast and north, extreme storm surge threat. But the other thing that's happening is this is where the most intense part of the storm is going to end up, energized by those upper level winds. as it makes this transition and moves across the state of Florida. There you see the strong winds. You see them coming in here like this and also kind of helping lift the storm to the north. So this is part of another dip in the jet stream of steering that's going to come along and lift it north. The question is that exact angle. Does it take it up just north of Tampa Bay, or does it take it just south? Somewhere in this area, there's high confidence, though, that a strong hurricane center is going to move ashore. And so the National Weather Service is indicating a 3 out of 4 flash flood threat for this entire northern part of the state of Florida because of that energy from the jet stream coming in, enhancing the left side of the hurricane. Strong winds, extreme rainfall on that northern side. So not that there's not going to be rain elsewhere and strong bands moving across the entire state, but in terms of really intense rainfall, that's where the concern is at this point. So concern for the entire state of Florida, of course, but for anybody from just north of Tampa Bay on south down to include the Fort Myers area. And again, you saw in Ian what happened in Naples. We saw in Helene how vulnerable this coastline is. So for folks that saw the Helene effect, add another 3 or 5 feet, maybe even more, to the Helene storm surge to imagine how high this water can be. In Ian, remember in Fort Myers Beach that was completely destroyed, we ended up with storm surge in the 15-foot range. That is what is forecast for somewhere in and around Tampa Bay down to Englewood. So that puts water over the barrier islands and into the mainland areas. And we just hope that everybody pays attention to all the alerts. The emergency managers have analyzed all this, worked with the National Hurricane Center, worked with Florida Emergency Management, and evacuation orders are in effect. Tomorrow you can still do it, but everybody in the world is going to be on the highway tomorrow. So try and think, where can you go to a safe spot that's on high ground and not any farther than you need to go, because evacuating tomorrow in the state of Florida is going to be very, very, very difficult. All right, everybody, stay well informed through this. We'll be here, and of course, I'll be on Fox Weather, and we'll be keeping you up to date there. If you don't get Fox Weather on your TV, you can always scan the QR code there. You can go to foxweather.tv. It'll tell you how to get it for free on your TV. You don't have to have cable. You don't have to have anything in order to get it. You can get it on your phone. Just download the Fox Weather app. You can get it on your computer if you go to foxweather.com. Foxweather.tv has all those instructions, and I'll see you there, and I'll see you here, of course. We'll keep you up to date through this event. All right, good luck, everybody, and stay safe.